Isabelle Sjövall, welcome to the Neuroarchitect.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Please tell us more about your career path and the motivations behind your focus on neuroarchitecture and brain research.
Well, I think it's a long story. I think my fascination within the field started without knowing, obviously it was connected to this field, was when I was very, very young. I started like thinking about the environment, and I like to sort of redo my room at home when I was very little, and to color code my teddy bears and things like that. So I had this sort of fascination from quite early on, I would say. But it was much later on when I started working in industry and with projects in architecture and design and remodeling um, about 20 years ago. And so I started from a very practical standpoint, and that made me also, this fascination sort of stayed with me. So I started wondering, I mean, when we changed the environment, I could also see, behavioral changes in mood, and that the people started behaving and feeling differently. So that was when I also put my other foot in research and academia. So I had this very strong practice side of things in design and architecture. And then I put my other foot in academia and research, and I combined them, and obviously leading to larger projects and things like that, and also books, for example, to try to help spread the field. But that's the short version of the story.
What year did you start doing work, like real work in academia?
It was about let's see here, about 5 years ago now. But before that, I had collaboration with researchers alongside my practical work, and then I decided I wanted to be a researcher myself as well. So you have to do the very long academic route then, with all the education and everything in neuroscience and brain research. So I did that in parallel with my ongoing practical work in the field.
But the first time you heard about the fact that you can combine neuroscience to architecture, which year was that?
I mean, I think I've sort of had it in the back of my head for many years, but I couldn't explain that was it was connected to this concept. But I think like really starting was about maybe 2013, I would say. So yeah, it's a few years ago now.
It was maybe a group of researchers or a certain expert who inspired you specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I got in touch with a brain researcher, and as I was working in, doing a lot of practical work in industry, so it was a good match. And I had a lot of I didn't know it at the time, but it was obviously research questions that I've sort of gathered during my time in practice, and we sort of turned those questions into a book. And so it was very much based on, almost like a field study during my years of, you know, uh, identifying like how these different design factors impact humans. And then I wanted to find out from the research. So that was like a big moment to connect the two.
Mm. Did you face any challenges?
Oh yes, constantly. Yeah, and especially in the beginning, I think.
It's
I think
for the audience because many of them are just seeing how patient maybe they must be or how insisting they must be and how much they must believe in what they're doing to reach their goal.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's easier now because the field has emerged and it's starting to resonate with a lot of people, organizations, and even on like a country level where you can adapt it as a national strategy for health and well-being with the built environment. So I think now we've seen like this big shift in that it's becoming more and more accepted. But I think when I started, it was certainly not the case. It was quite the opposite. It was a lot of resistance, and also people were quite negative, and yeah, it was completely different times, and also like almost like you were from outer space. What does neuroscience has to do with architecture and design? They couldn't really um, link the two. So I'm very happy now when it's been, it's been a while, a couple of years. And now I think more and more people, also because of raised awareness around, how the brain works and how important it is with mental health, for example. So I think it's exciting times.
I understand you completely because I had to face this kind of challenges back in 2011. So it was about the same time.
I think it's always like that with new fields. I
Mm.
mean, you usually have quite a lot of resistance in the beginning. You will only have a few like early adopters in the beginning that will sort of see that yeah, that will make sense. But then I think later on for the general public to accept a new field, yeah, that has to be later on, and you have to prove yourself many times over, I think.
And it is quite interesting that we're talking today together. And 15 years ago, we were working separately. We were believing in the same
Yeah.
concept. And we were trying to raise awareness around the world, in different
Yes.
parts of the world.
Yes. And I think that's a great reflection. I think that's also what has been part of a positive shift, in my opinion, that we have seen these different parallel streams. We've seen groups and people trying to sort of raise awareness around this field on their own. But I think now we're starting to also see like a global community around this, and we see also that we can find our people to sort of help to be a joint force for good. And I think that's going to be very useful. And it's going to also, I think it's going to accelerate the field in the coming years.
And especially if we share our ideas and maybe check who can do what, like to distribute the roles at some point in the same research or in different topics within
Yeah.
the
Exactly. And I think I'm very positive to all kinds of collaborations. And I think also, certainly in research, of course, because that's how you work, but also in industry and also between, the intersection between research and industry. I think that's very, very important. So I think it's collaboration is like a um, key factor for future success.
and never hesitate to say what we have because our ideas and hypotheses might be an inspiration for another point that someone might think about when we're talking.
Exactly. I completely agree. And I think also that's the beauty of, like, if you are generous with sharing ideas and you don't keep them to yourself, then other people will get new ideas and then you can work together. And I think that's one of the greatest joys of the field.
Today I was reading about like a finding in neuroscience. It's not like purely neuroarchitecture, it's neuroscience
Mhm.
and about the human skin and the cells. And the first thing that came to my mind was that how important like it is to imagine and not to say, oh, this is not gonna be real. This is not like just imagine and try to figure out if it's real.
Yeah.
So real.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, like, not always, by default, like resisting new ideas, but to actually think about and to read new literature and to sort of have this critical thinking skills to evaluate what you're reading.
Speaking about this, what did you focus on specifically, and were you able, like, to implement your findings in certain projects and see results?
Yeah, I mean, I have one part of my work is within pure research. So we do research projects within connected to UCL. Um, so we do a lot of experiments, but usually those experiments also stem from like questions from what we call the real world. So my other um, part of my time I dedicate to working with like very hands-on projects with industry, and it could be everything from like green infrastructure, for example, and new urban areas that are about to be developed. Um, or it could be office buildings, it could also be hospitals, it could be schools. So it's a wide range of different kinds of environments, but the key is to try to promote health, performance, and well-being using then the neuroscience and psychology from research to turn that and to sort of translate that from the research into practical solutions. And it's a tricky one, but it's also very, very interesting. And I see now also there's an appetite from the real world and from industry and from property owners to actually implement it, which is very, very exciting.
So you work basically on public places more than the private ones.
Yes, I do. Mainly, I used to work with residential projects as well, but now it's mainly because I want to devote my time to the projects and the places where I can make the most impact for most people. So I think then working with a larger scale makes sense to me because that's also where I can make a positive impact, hopefully.
You did a PhD in neuroarchitecture, is it correct?
In cognitive neuroscience, but my thesis is in neurodesign and neuroarchitecture, yes. So it's very closely related. And then prior to that, I did my master's in neuroscience, psychology, and mental health.
Mm.
Um,
What was the topic?
you mean for
The thesis topic.
it will be neurodesign and neuroarchitecture.
Um, okay, what about participants?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's like a range of different projects. So it's everything from fMRI, where we look at deep structures in the brain and see how you react to different types of built environments, to like field studies where we measure, like for example, hospitals, office buildings, or urban infrastructure. It could be. So it's the scale is very varied. So it's like inside out, and it's everything related to the built environment. So that's very interesting.
Is there any finding while you were working, while you were doing your research that made you feel like, wow, what an interesting field I chose?
Yes, I would say every day. It's very intriguing usually, and I think one of the best places to be in is when you've sort of finalized data collection, and you've designed all the research protocols. All the participants has been you've been collecting all the data, and then you sit there with this data, and you're about to analyze it and to find out you know what the data shows you and see the results. And I think that's very, very intriguing. Um, and I think a lot of things are surprising. Obviously, you always, when you design your studies, you always go to the previous literature. You look what have people done, and then you build some sort of hypotheses around that. But then also what I'm trying to look at in my research, which I think has been a challenge for the field, is that in other types of research, you usually you measure one factor, and then you see how that factor would sort of impact things. Whereas in the built environment, we are always constantly impacted by various factors in the environment, and the brain sort of puts that together into your experience of a place or a space. So what's also interesting is to see how we know that, for example, biophilic design or light or forms or colors, for example, or tactility in materials, how that would have an impact. But to put all those together, like how we experience real spaces, and to try to measure that, that's truly fascinating to me.
Give us one example of one study.
I would say one study that we're working on now is in one of the London boroughs. We're looking at green infrastructure, and we if you talk about interiors, you usually talk about biophilic design, which is connectedness to nature. And here we're looking at. I've invented a new index, the Neurodesign and Neuroarchitecture Index. So we're trying actually to measure people's experience based on the brain research connected to that space, and we use a few spaces or places where they have implemented, the boroughs in London have implemented biophilic design, and other places and spaces where they haven't. So they work as a control, and now we're measuring the experience and how that would impact health and well-being among those people uh, in those spaces. So that's one example, and another example is fMRI studies where we you know you can't bring an fMRI scanner out in the real world. You have to bring people into the lab. So, but what you do then is that you simulate environments through 360 videos inside of the scanner. and you can look at structures in the brain and the function of the brain, and you can also look at biomarkers, for example, like a heart rate or respiratory rate, so you see how the brain and the body reacts. So that's, I think it's fascinating also to look at the real world, because that's difficult, because you always have these dynamics of the real world, but that's also interesting. Whereas in the lab environment, it's very, very controlled. But I think combining them is where we also see like the links between the two, and that's where we can make new findings.
I'm curious to know how the participants react when you ask them to do this kind of experiment. Maybe in different cultures, the reaction will be different. So, are you working in within one culture, and how are the participants reacting when you ask them?
Yeah, I mean, since it's an index, the index should be comparable, and also comparable with other like, clinometric measures that are very, well established, from like the WHO, for example. But that's a very good question. That's something that we account for and we control for in the index. But this far, we have done it in the UK and also in Scandinavia. So we are now looking to expand it to other types of cultures, because obviously it's gonna vary and it's gonna be slightly different. But since the approach is still, neurobiology, and that, even though we're different, we have different cultures and countries, and preferences sometimes, we still have this um, universal foundation where, as humans, we would need certain things from the environment, like, connectedness to nature. We would need, some rest and recovery. We would need daylight, for example, and, social connection. So I'm fascinated by looking at not so much what makes us different, even though we control for, neurodiversity, for example, as well. But I'm interested in looking at like the common ground from like a neurobiological perspective, and to tap into those mechanisms to try to enhance future environments.
Hmm. If you're working on eye tracking, then we can start with a comparative study between and
Yes, yes.
for example.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think also like combining different methods, I think it's necessary also for this field,
Mm.
because there's so many things that we need to find out. So I think also like collaborating and doing things together, it's a very good way forward.
This is how we can, let's say, collaborate and give an added information about the different cultures.
Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. We did a study last year on neurodiversity, actually, in urban environments, and we can see from the eye tracking data it's being analyzed now, that you can see that, for example, if you have ADHD or if you have, autism, that your tracking data comes back very differently. That what you look at in the city environment, for example. So I think it's fascinating, and also to gain a better understanding how we can create more inclusive environments if we can, get a better sense of that variation.
Mm. Tell me more about this topic of people with ADHD, and because I worked also on this topic, and I worked on also people who have PTSD and dementia. So do you have more um, finding to tell us about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not specialized in that field, but we do control for that, since it could affect also how you process sensory information.
Mhm.
So we do control for that. In certain studies, we do look at, for example, diverse individuals. How um, do they experience this environment differently? Is it, the amount of cognitive load and stimuli, for example? So we do look at that. Um, but overall, I think the foundation is neurobiology. Like, we look at the foundation of, the things that we all need, that we can see also is lacking now, for example, and people become stressed in many cases from environments. So we need better balance.
And within the same culture. So you said like you worked on people in the UK. What common points did you find? What do they want and what they don't want? And what differences did you find, maybe based on personal experience or based on maybe differences within the neighborhoods?
Mm, that's a good question. And actually the data is being analyzed now.
Mm.
So in a little bit we will know the difference. But at the moment I think we need also more studies to be able to compare it more fairly, I think. And in also different types of environments. For example, like what's the purpose of the space? Like if it's an urban space, for example, or if it's an office space or a hospital or a you know educational space. So I think it's important to also collect more data to have to have also the possibility to compare both between the spaces, between different kind of settings, and also between different cultures and countries.
For people who are not in the field but are interested to implement something to feel better, or to do something in their offices or classrooms, what can you advise them to do in simple words, not in a research word?
I would say, I mean, I think the strongest like direction we see now in neuroscience would be the benefits of nature and biophilic design. So if I can choose, one component, like go for this to make it better, I would say implement nature in the way you can. And it could be, I mean, if it depends on the budget, obviously, and the space and what you can do and feasibility. But I think, I mean, obviously make sure you have enough daylight because that's also it's connected to the circadian rhythm and it's regulating, our bodies to a large extent. And then I say, if you have a budget to actually go for something to add, I would say go for, you know, biodiverse green plants, I would say, because that's also something that we see from the research is beneficial.
Yes, the plants are important because they give you the color, they give you the shape
Yeah.
that you used to look at. It gives also the movement. So when the plants are moving, also the brain, that's why they tell us to walk also, because you
Yeah.
see different scenes. So the plant is already moving and it's giving you different scenes to process.
Also, I think the air quality could be improved because it could also like help with the particles, and it could also help to put more oxygen in the indoor environment, for example. So I think it's a very important feature.
Mm. So the oxygen is for us and for the plants. Plus, the daylight, because it also changes at every millisecond. So it's not like the artificial light. Also, it makes our eyesight try to adapt, which makes work, like do exercise. And this
Yeah,
is good, actually our body to keep in this different movement,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
like
yeah. I think it's good to
exercise
shift
sometimes.
because I think a lot of people sit in front of the computer all day. So I think it's also good to shift to more horizon view. And it could also be like if you have a nice view, you can see maybe nature from the window. That could also be something to connect with nature. So it doesn't have to be something that you bring in. It depends on what you can do basically. But I like to stay positive, so I usually say you can always do something. It depends on the space.
What about also tricking the brain? Like, okay, not maybe putting the plant, but trying to put some maybe green paintings or something of a plant, or maybe try to implement this natural fractals in furniture. We can find any.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've seen studies on when you put in like for example, art with nature motives or things like that. And it also seems to have an effect. I would say like real nature and be actually being in nature would be like the highest level. But it's also very good to have like nature motives on art. And I would say, as you say, also that the fractal geometry with the patterns from nature seems to be like stimulating, but also helping our brains to recover at the same time. So I think there are many ways, in which you can actually incorporate nature into an environment.
And the brain is is more like of computer, let's say, that processes the information more than the nature of things. I mean, we can at some point trick the brain to understand something, to process it in a certain way.
Yeah, maybe that's true. Yeah, I think also like it's always the um, sort of overall experience. So I think it's fascinating with all these different components that, together the brain will make, judgment like, okay, this is my experience based on all the things. So I think it's a lot of processes are also unconscious, actually. Some of them are conscious, but a lot of them are unconscious as well. So that's connected to our survival system, I would say.
Evolution and what we inherited throughout this evolution. What
Sorry.
about facades, like the exterior? Like we're talking now, we talked about furniture and interior space. What about facades?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you look at it from this neurobiological perspective, I would say, I mean, our brains develop an adaptive response to natural environments. So if you think about the African savanna, for example, and I think if you have that perspective, so you would have that, our brains are designed for that kind of environments. And then very rapidly, we start living in cities, and the brain is still designed in the way it used to be. So it's nothing wrong with us if we get stress from cities. It's too much stimuli and too little recovery. Um, so I think the way that we have built this far, not everything is bad, but I think we could do better if we um, keep this biological perspective in mind. I think it's going to help us hugely.
So based on your experience also, what would you say? Because we're talking like we started from the interior, now about facades. What about public spaces, configurations and furniture, benches,
Yeah.
lights?
Yeah.
What would you say? What should we do?
I would say, I mean, we start to see now that this is starting to change things, and also municipalities and boroughs are starting to think differently about how to design public spaces, and also how to make them more, that they feel safe and they are accessible, but also inclusive. So what I've seen now is that actually a lot of streams are around biophilic design, and it could also be like implementing patterns on facades, for example, and not, allowing too, high-rise building, or only to an extent. So you still will have the natural daylight on the streets, for example. Um, and I think, when I see city planning and infrastructure now, I think there's an appetite for creating more shared spaces, for example, and also third places, and to implement nature. So we see that also on facades, like with green walls on roofs, with these. In Sweden, it's starting to be very common now. With you put like a meadow on roofs, because that's also like good for biodiversity, but it's also good for us when we see diverse environments from nature. That's also stress reducing for us. So I think this is starting to be implemented now. So it's very interesting to see where we are in a couple of years.
Mm. And these stress reducing factors automatically make us more agreeable and maybe accepting the other within the social frame. Maybe to be less stressful towards each other, or maybe accepting to become within a group to accept the other community within the same city, or to be less stressful in general, like even in driving and walking, in our pace of moving, in our posture.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, nowadays we see a lot of people reporting that they feel very stressed. And I don't say stress is not a bad thing. It could be a very good thing that could enhance like performance, but it's supposed to be not chronic. It's supposed to be on a short periods where we need to get something done, or we need to have our like performance um, to deliver something. So yeah, I mean, I would say to try to incorporate so we can have more stress reduction, because I think that would also make, I mean, if people are balanced themselves, they usually treat others better. They usually also they don't walk around and seeing threats everywhere. So I think that's going to be useful for everyone.
Actually, stress is a very healthy way for our body to tell us something is wrong. So when they tell us just adapt, okay, maybe we can just act that we're resilient or we're adapting in at the conscious level, but then everything will appear again in some sort of disease, in some sort of chronic behavior, that we don't want, and that becomes collective. Like it will become like viral because we tend to how to say it's contagious. It's a contagious factor sometimes, and it becomes a collective, and within the collective identity, maybe our way of behaving and our way of processing this information. So we cannot just say, okay, just adapt. Mm, we need time, first of all, biologically, anatomically, we need time. And second, maybe we should find a way to make it maybe a little bit with a slower pace for our bodies to really adapt to this novelty.
Yeah. I agree that also like stress could be very good to tell us that we need to act on something.
Mm.
So like very acute, like it could be very efficient and good for performance. But that's like on a short term. But then I think what's problematic with cities in general is that there are so many stressors over time. So I don't think our brains and bodies get a chance to recover properly. So, and that's where I see that if we also incorporate more biophilic design in also all types of environment, could be urban spaces, but also indoors, that could also help us to actually balance the ratio between the stressors and also the resilience factors in a better way, I think.
This doesn't contradict the fact that people can still invest in the city and make profits. It's just about a little bit of changes in the design or in the way of um, thinking the concept of
Yeah.
the design. It's just this a little bit of shift. It's not a waste of time. It's not a waste of money. It's the opposite. Actually, you will have healthy people accepting this progress.
Absolutely, and I think cities offers a lot of opportunities as well in terms of like access to work, education, healthcare, culture. So I think as a foundation, it's a good thing, and also in terms of um, if you think about sustainability and economics and things like that. But I think we need to find a way to make it more sustainable on the larger scale, to make it less stressful, but still keep the good things, but to better balance these um, chronic stressors that obviously is doing something to us over time.
We have a lot of data to quantify now based on what we
Yes. Oh yes. Oh yes, absolutely. But I mean, there are quite a few studies on like large population studies where you can see that, rates of depression or psychosis and schizophrenia and, so mental health is affected, and you see a higher prevalence in urban environments in cities, for example. And it's been debated where that comes from. But one of the major sort of streams there is that chronic stress is not it could impact onset, and it could also impact severity. So I think it's interesting to find out how we can better balance that, and make use of the positive things in cities, which are plenty, but how we maybe can also build better resilience in these environments.
And also loneliness, which is the root of so many diseases. When you decide to withdraw, when you're so much like you feel that you're out of reach of what you already thought that would exist or what you expected from the urban like environment, and when you feel rejected also. So when there is no inclusiveness enough.
Absolutely, and I think also it's important to feel connected and to make also spaces where people would feel um, they can connect with others. Because I think also cities could be a lonely place if you feel like one in many, many million. But I think to create spaces within that big environment where you can actually have that sort of human connection in a good way. It could be parks, for example, or other spaces where you can meet more naturally and where you can feel safe and also it's accessible and inclusive.
Mm. After all, the city is the mirror of ourselves when we look at it. Because we look at the mirror to look at ourselves, but we look at everything else also to see ourselves in it. And when we don't feel that we're matching, we feel this disconnection or dissociation. This is the root also of many diseases like that are based on dissociation.
Mm.
Mm.
Didn't know that.
Thoughts or message you would like to deliver?
It was great talking to you, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you too. And thanks for watching us.